Albert was still immersed in mourning for the death of his wife, even 5 years after her passing. Those who knew him well noticed that he had lost the sparkle in his eyes. However, his life was about to take an unexpected turn when he encountered a waitress identical to his late wife. What Albert would discover next would leave him completely speechless. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. Albert was a respected lawyer in his city. At 35 years old, he had built a solid career and was known for his competence and professional ethics. Tall, with an athletic build and slightly greying hair, Albert had a striking presence. His office was located in the city's financial centre, in an imposing building overlooking the Central Park. Stephanie, his wife, was a university mathematics professor. She was an elegant and vain woman, always impeccably dressed and made up. Her long brown hair framed a delicate face with expressive green eyes. Despite her sophisticated appearance, Stephanie was extremely kind and beloved by everyone around her. The couple lived in an elegant house in a prestigious neighbourhood of the city. The modern and clean decor, with predominant beige tones, reflected both their refined taste. The designer furniture, carefully selected artworks and decorative objects created an atmosphere that was welcoming and sophisticated at the same time. Albert and Stephanie were known for their wine and cheese tasting nights. Stephanie was a natural hostess, always attentive to details to ensure the comfort and enjoyment of her guests. These gatherings were moments of relaxation and laughter, where friends met to share good stories and savour selected delicacies. Their marriage was in a wonderful place. After years of dedication to their careers, they were finally starting to plan the arrival of a child. Conversations about the future were full of expectations and dreams. The love between them was evident to anyone who saw them together, whether at a romantic dinner or on a simple walk in the park. However, life has its own plans. Stephanie had been experiencing some abdominal pain for a few days, but with the end of the school year approaching and her workload increasing, she chose to postpone a visit to the doctor. She took painkillers to relieve the discomfort and carried on, thinking that she would soon have time to take care of her health. On a Friday night, after a long day of classes, Stephanie came home feeling worse than ever. The pain was now unbearable, accompanied by a high fever and vomiting. Albert, alarmed by his wife's condition, didn't hesitate to take her to the nearest hospital. In the emergency room, the doctors quickly diagnosed a ruptured appendix. The situation was serious, and the infection was already spreading through Stephanie's body. She was immediately taken into surgery, while Albert awaited anxiously in the waiting room. The hours that followed were the longest of Albert's life. He alternated between moments of hope and despair, imagining his life without Stephanie. When the doctor finally appeared, the expression on his face said it all. Despite all the efforts of the medical team, the infection had spread rapidly, and Stephanie's body couldn't withstand it. Albert felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. In just 3 days, his life had been completely turned upside down. The woman he loved, with whom he planned to build a family, had been ripped from his arms so suddenly and cruelly. The days that followed were a blur of sadness and disbelief. Stephanie's funeral brought together dozens of people, colleagues, students, friends, and family, all equally shocked by the sudden loss. Albert could barely process the words of comfort he received. His heart was too shattered to find solace. Returning home without Stephanie was one of the most painful experiences Albert had ever endured. Every corner of the house held memories of her. Her scent still lingered on the sheets, her clothes in the closet, the math books carefully organised in her office. It was as if she could walk through the door at any moment, smiling and asking about his day. The months dragged on, and Albert found himself trapped in a lonely routine. He immersed himself in work, taking on more cases than was wise, in a desperate attempt to fill the void left by Stephanie. The nights were the worst. The silence of the house was deafening, and he found himself replaying his last moments with his wife, blaming himself for not insisting she see a doctor sooner. Friends and family tried to cheer him up, urging him to go out and meet new people. But Albert couldn't even consider the idea of a new relationship. To him, No one could replace Stephanie, her intelligence, her elegance, her affection. Any attempt at comparison left Albert even more convinced that he would never find anyone like her. Years passed, and although the sharp pain of the loss had transformed into a constant sadness, Albert still couldn't completely free himself from the past. His social life was reduced to occasional dinners with close friends and visits to family. At work, he maintained his reputation for excellence, but his colleagues noticed that the sparkle in his eyes had faded. 5 years after Stephanie's death on a Wednesday afternoon, Albert had scheduled a meeting with a new client in a part of the city he rarely visited. Upon arriving at the agreed location, he received a message informing him that the meeting had been cancelled at the last minute. Frustrated, but not in the mood to return to the office immediately, he decided to enter a small cafe on the corner for a cup of coffee. The atmosphere was cosy, with dark wooden tables and comfortable chairs. Albert chose a table near the window and picked up the menu without really paying attention to what he was reading. He was lost in thought when he heard a female voice asking if he was ready to order. When he looked up, Albert felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. There, in front of him, was a woman who could have been Stephanie's twin sister. The same green eyes, the same gentle smile. Even her voice was incredibly similar. "Stephanie?" he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. The waitress smiled, a little confused. "I think you're mistaken. I'm Flora. Have you decided what you're going to order?" Albert blinked several times, trying to process what he was seeing. "What am I going to order?" he repeated, still stunned. "Yes, what you'll order from the menu," Flora explained patiently. "If you need more time, I can come back in a bit to take your order." Only then did Albert realise he was acting strangely. He quickly ordered the first item his eyes landed on in the menu, a cappuccino and a piece of apple pie. As Flora walked away to prepare the order, Albert couldn't take his eyes off her. The resemblance was simply incredible. In the days that followed, Albert found himself inexplicably drawn back to that cafe. Although it was far from his office, he concocted excuses to be in that part of the city. Each visit was a mix of emotions: joy at seeing such a familiar face, sadness at remembering it wasn't really Stephanie, and a strange sense of comfort he hadn't felt in years. Flora always served him with a warm smile, exchanging a few friendly words while taking his order. Albert discovered that she had been working at the cafe for only a few months, having recently moved to the city. Gradually, he gathered small details about her life, creating a mental image of this woman who so resembled his late wife. After almost a month of daily visits, Albert finally mustered the courage to do something he hadn't done in years: invite a woman out. "Flora," he began, feeling his heart race. "I'm sorry if I'm being inappropriate, but I would like to know if you would accept having dinner with me tomorrow." Flora seemed surprised for a moment, but then her face lit up with a smile. "Sure, why not? It would be great to chat outside of the work environment." Albert felt a wave of relief and excitement. As they arranged the details, he was already beginning to mentally plan the evening. He would take Flora to his and Stephanie's favourite restaurant and order the wine they always shared on special occasions. It was almost as if he was planning another romantic night with his wife. The next day, Albert got ready with a care he hadn't taken in years. He chose one of his best suits, wore his favourite cologne, and even went to the barber to trim his beard. Looking at himself in the mirror, he caught a glimpse of the man he used to be before the tragedy that altered his life. Arriving at the address Flora had given him, Albert was surprised. It was a small house in a quiet residential neighbourhood, painted a vibrant green that stood out among the more subdued houses around. He couldn't help but smile, finding the choice of colour somewhat amusing and unexpected. When the door opened, Albert had to remind himself to breathe. Flora looked stunning, but in a completely different way than he had expected. She wore a floral dress full of bright colours that contrasted with her fair skin. Her hair, which was always tied up at work, now fell in loose waves over her shoulders. It was a look totally opposite to the classic elegance that Stephanie always preferred. "You look beautiful," Albert managed to say, still a bit surprised by the transformation. Flora smiled, a little shy. Thank you. You are also very elegant. So, where are we going? Albert explained about the restaurant he had chosen, a refined place in the city centre. Flora seemed excited about the idea, and they headed towards the location. Upon arrival, however, an unpleasant surprise awaited them. Despite Albert having made the reservation, there was some error, and the table was not available. The restaurant was completely full, with no openings expected. I'm sorry about this, Flora, Albert said, feeling embarrassed. We'll have to go somewhere else. Flora, far from seeming disappointed, smiled excitedly. No problem, Albert. Actually, a restaurant just opened near the cafe and I would really like to go. Do you mind if we go there? Relieved that she wasn't upset, Albert readily agreed. They drove back to the neighbourhood of the cafe, making small talk along the way. Albert noticed with admiration how Flora talked with her hands, gesturing animatedly as she described the new restaurant. When they arrived, Albert noticed that the place was completely different from what he was used to. The atmosphere was rustic and cosy. Large shared wooden tables and a live band playing lively music. The smell of homemade food filled the air, blending with the sound of laughter and conversation from the patrons. They sat at a table already occupied by a lively group of young people. Before Albert could even open the menu, Flora had already ordered 2 cold beers and a variety of appetizers to share. I hope you like well-seasoned food, she said with a playful smile. I've heard the fried chicken here is simply divine. Albert found himself smiling back, captivated by Flora's enthusiasm. He watched, fascinated as she moved to the rhythm of the music, interacted naturally with the people around her, and laughed openly at the jokes told by the musicians between songs. At one point, to Albert's surprise, the musicians took a break and came down from the stage, greeting Flora like old friends. The next song is with you, Flora, one of them announced, to the delight of the audience. Before Albert could process what was happening, Flora was already on stage, microphone in hand. When the music started, Albert was completely captivated. Flora's voice was powerful and soulful, filling the room with an infectious energy. He found himself smiling and clapping along with the rest of the audience, completely mesmerised by that colourful figure on stage. I occasionally perform with them at some events, you know how it is. A little extra money always comes in handy, Flora explained as she returned to the table, cheeks flushed with the excitement of the performance. The hours flew by. Albert couldn't remember the last time he had enjoyed himself so much. When he finally left Flora at home, late at night, he was surprised to realise that he had barely thought about Stephanie during the entire dinner. The next day, a mix of emotions took over Albert. He had invited Flora with the intention of perhaps reliving moments he had with Stephanie, but the reality had been completely different. Aside from physical appearance, Flora had nothing in common with his late wife. And surprisingly, Albert realised that this didn't bother him. In the days that followed, Albert did not go to the cafe. He needed time to process his feelings, to understand what he truly wanted. And it was then that he realised something surprising. When he thought of Flora, he no longer focused on her resemblance to Stephanie. He found himself remembering her on stage, singing with passion. He remembered her loose, natural hair, her spontaneity and joy, how colourful she was, both in her clothes and in her personality. It was at that moment that Albert understood. He wanted to meet Flora again. Not as a substitute for Stephanie, not as a chance to relive the past, but as an opportunity to experience something entirely new and unexpected. Albert was finally ready to move on, not to forget the past. Stephanie would always be an important part of his life and who he was, but to embrace new possibilities, new experiences, a new chance at happiness. With a smile on his face, Albert picked up the phone. When Flora answered, he felt his heart race in a way it hadn't in years. Hello, Flora, he said, his voice full of newfound confidence. I was wondering if you would be interested in going out with me again. This time I'll let you choose the place." Flora's cheerful laughter on the other end of the line was all the answer he needed. Albert realised he was ready for a new adventure, to get to know Flora for who she truly was, without comparisons or expectations based on the past. In that moment, Albert understood a fundamental truth. Each person is unique, and trying to compare or replace them not only can ruin romantic relationships, but also friendships and opportunities for personal growth. With this new understanding, he was ready to open his heart again, this time to a completely new and unexpected story. If you enjoyed, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you liked the story. Also, watch the video that is currently on your screen. See you soon.